It's the early hours of Thursday, January 29th, 2026. Gold has just punched through the 5,500 line, and the world is suddenly staring at a question that has nothing to do with charts and everything to do with keys. Because one of the largest piles of sovereign gold on Earth is not sitting inside the country that owns it. Germany's official gold reserve is roughly 3,950 tons, and a reported 1,236 tons of that, more than a third, is stored inside the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Do the math. 1 ton is about 32,150 troy ounces. Multiply that by 1,236, and you are looking at roughly 39.7 million ounces of metal. At 5,500 an ounce, that is a value north of $200 billion. This is not a story about whether gold is valuable. Everyone can see the price. This is a story about whether access is valuable. Because in calm decades, ownership and access feel identical. In stressed years, ownership and access can split into two different realities. Tonight, I'm going to give you a forensic, no-drama breakdown. 1. Where the metal is and why it ended up there. 2. What the Berlin demand actually means in operational terms. 3. What verification looks like in the real world, not on paper. 4. And the 5 signals that tell you if this stays a debate or becomes a precedent. Quick engagement check. Comment your city and country. I want to see where this report is landing. And if you value calm, data-first breakdowns, subscribe. These stories don't knock twice. Now, let's go to the map. The vault map. Germany's reserve is typically described in 3 locations: Frankfurt, the home base; New York, the deep liquidity hub; London, the trading corridor. This arrangement was built for a specific reason. In a world dominated by international settlement, you store your strategic collateral close to the pipes. Think of it like this. You don't park an ambulance in the countryside. You park it near the hospital. In the decades after the war, New York was the hospital. Deep markets, rapid swaps, global settlement, maximum optionality. So why are people talking about moving the ambulance home now? Because gold is not an ordinary asset. Gold is the asset you keep for the day you don't trust ordinary assets. And when trust becomes expensive, custody becomes a national conversation. What this demand really is, the phrase Berlin demand, sounds like a slogan. In reality, it describes 2 very specific requests. Request 1, inspection, not a press release, not a reassurance, a physical process. Officials want the ability to verify bar-by-bar custody. Request 2, repatriation, a logistics operation, moving a larger share of foreign-held bars back to domestic vaults. These requests are not exotic. They are how serious institutions behave when the stakes rise. If you are the legal owner of an asset, the next question is always the same. Can I prove it, and can I move it on my timetable? That is the entire story in one sentence. Why this is not conspiracy and not drama. Let's neutralize the noise. There is a version of the internet that treats every gold story as a thriller. And there is a version of the mainstream that treats every gold story as a nuisance. Both miss the real point. This is not about panic. This is about standards. When a government holds bars abroad, the bar list matters. The audit protocol matters. The chain of custody matters. Because if the system ever transitions into a world where collateral is king again, the question becomes, what is liquid and what is unquestioned? That is why you should care even if you don't own gold. Custody standards are the language of trust. And trust is the foundation the entire credit world sits on. How the New York Fed Vault actually works. Let's get practical. The New York Fed Vault is a custody facility for official institutions. It stores gold on behalf of foreign central banks and international bodies. The idea is simple. You don't need to ship metal across oceans every time you want to swap it, lend it, or use it as collateral. You can move ownership inside the same building. But here's the detail that matters. A vault is not a spreadsheet. Real verification is physical. And physical means these questions. Are the bars allocated to the owner or pooled in a generic claim structure? Is the bar list current, complete, and independently auditable? Can the owner's representatives view, count, and reconcile serials to records? Are assays and weights documented to modern standards? How is chain of custody tracked for any bar that changes status? When someone says, "Show me the bars," they're not being theatrical. They're asking for the basic controls that serious custody requires. The inspection problem, in plain language. An inspection dispute is never about the metal alone. It's about the rules for proving the metal. Imagine you store a family heirloom in a bank safety box for decades. Then one day you ask, "Can I open the box and photograph every item for my records?" If the answer is clean and routine, you relax. If the answer becomes complicated, you don't necessarily assume theft, but you do assume risk. And in finance, risk is not what you think. Risk is what can happen while you are waiting for permission. That is why the inspection issue matters more than the headline. Because in a system that runs on confidence, delays and limitations can be weaponized by fear, even if nothing is actually wrong. Why price changes everything. Now we talk about timing. Gold above 5,500 doesn't just raise value, it raises sensitivity. At low prices, custody friction is tolerated. At record prices, custody friction becomes politically expensive and financially embarrassing. When an asset becomes more valuable, three behaviors appear everywhere. More scrutiny, more auditing, more demand for direct control. That's not ideology, that's incentive. And that's why the conversation is louder today than it was when gold was quieter. The real reason nations hold gold at all. Most people think gold is held for profit. That's not the primary reason. Sovereign gold is held for credibility and optionality. Credibility: if the world questions your paper promises, gold is the ultimate backstop. Optionality: if the world fractures, gold can be mobilized without relying on payment rails. And that is why location matters. Because optionality is not theoretical. Optionality is physical. A reserve you can access quickly has more practical power than a reserve you can access slowly, even if both look identical on a balance sheet. 4 doors of custody. Here's the framework I want you to remember. 4 doors. Door 1, transparency. Do you have clean, current bar lists and clear audit trails? Door 2, verification. Can you physically reconcile bars to records through a repeatable protocol? Door 3, mobility. Can you relocate the asset on your timetable without surprise friction? Door 4, usability. Can the asset be used as credible collateral in a stressed environment? If all 4 doors open smoothly, the story stays boring. If any door sticks, the story becomes combustible. What an escalation would look like. Escalation will not arrive as a dramatic announcement. It will arrive as a calendar. Here is the progression. First, more public calls for expanded inspection rights. Second, formal requests for documentation standards. Third, committee language, timelines, targets. Fourth, logistical preparation, because moving hundreds of tons is not symbolic. It is aircraft, insurance, security, scheduling, cost. It is operational. So watch for operational language. When you see operational language, the decision is already moving behind the curtain. What the other side says to keep this forensic, we include the counterpoint. Central banks and custodians often argue that foreign vaulting is safe, efficient, and historically proven. They will point to completed repatriations in past years and say, the system worked. And that matters too, because it tells you the baseline truth. The system can function. So the real question is not can it function? The real question is under what conditions does it function smoothly? That's the entire debate. Why this matters to every Western saver. Now bring it home. Even if you never buy an ounce, this story matters because it is a stress test of the trust layer. When the trust layer is strong, the financial system can leverage collateral smoothly. When the trust layer is questioned, the system tightens. Tightness shows up as higher physical premiums, higher demand for direct settlement, higher costs to insure and store, and lower appetite for promises that depend on counterparties. And those dynamics don't stay inside gold. They leak into funding markets, collateral markets, and risk markets. In other words, custody is not a niche issue. Custody is macro. The 5 signals to watch here is your checklist for the next 30 to 90 days. No prediction, just signals. Signal 1, the transparency signal. Do bar list and audit demands become specific, procedural, and mainstream? Signal 2, the access signal. Do we hear about expanded inspection protocols, not just reassurance language? Signal 3, the timeline signal. Do any official bodies mention dates, committees, targets, or transfer plans? Signal 4, the market signal. Do physical premiums and delivery timelines tighten at the same time, indicating higher preference for touchable settlement? Signal 5, the narrative signal. Do mainstream institutions begin treating custody as normal due diligence, not fringe talk? If you see 1 and 2, it's pressure. If you see 3, it's motion. If you see 3 plus 4, it's stress. If you see all 5, it's a regime shift in how sovereigns treat custody. Flashback, how we got here. To understand why this story has energy, you have to remember the last big move. In the early 2010s, Germany publicly committed to shifting more of its gold home. The plan was simple on paper and heavy in practice. Relocate large blocks of bars from foreign vaults into Frankfurt over a multi-year schedule. The transfers were completed ahead of the initial deadline. That fact is important because it proves something real. Gold can be moved, even at sovereign scale, when the decision is made. But it also proves something else. The moment you start moving gold, you teach the public to ask, if moving it was possible then, why not move more now? And that question never fully goes away. It waits. It sleeps. Then price wakes it up. Allocated versus unallocated, the two worlds. Now we have to talk about the word that quietly separates calm from chaos: allocation. Allocated gold means specific bars are held for a specific owner. Serial numbers, weights, records. The bars are not part of a pool. Unallocated gold is a claim. It can function smoothly in normal markets, but it is structurally different from owning bars with your name on the metal. When people worry about paper gold, they are often pointing at the unallocated world, claims that behave like metal until stress arrives. Sovereigns usually want the allocated world, but the public often doesn't realize that many private gold products are built on the unallocated world. That's why this German debate has a second shadow audience: everyone who owns gold exposure through financial products. Because the public question becomes contagious. If a nation wants to touch bars, what exactly do I own? Why New York and London matter differently. New York is custody and official settlement. London is trading flow. London's market structure is built around large wholesale bars, professional vaulting, and deep liquidity. In calm times, it is efficient. But efficiency has a cost. It encourages leverage. It encourages lending. It encourages claims layered over metal. Again, this does not mean the system is fake. It means the system is optimized for normality. And in an era where markets are repeatedly reminded that normal can change overnight, more institutions begin to prefer the slow, boring option: direct control. The real fear, without the drama. Let's say the quiet part out loud, carefully. The fear is not that a custodian has lost gold in a cartoon sense. The fear is that in a global stress scenario, priorities change. In stress, bureaucracies become slower. In stress, permissions become more complex. In stress, legal risk increases. In stress, every cross-border process acquires friction. So even if every bar is exactly where it should be, the question becomes, can I mobilize it when I need it, at the speed I need it? That is not conspiracy, that is logistics. How gold can be used, and why that creates sensitivity. Gold is not just a trophy. It can be used in swaps, in temporary exchanges, in collateral operations that help stabilize markets. Those operations can be perfectly legitimate, but they create a public communications problem, because if citizens can't clearly see the boundary between stored and mobilized, they assume the worst. This is why transparency matters so much. When you say, "Trust us," you are spending trust. When you publish protocols, you are earning trust. 3 scenarios, from calm to consequential. Scenario 1. The debate cools. Inspection protocols are clarified. Documentation is expanded. The story fades. Markets move on. Scenario 2. Staged repositioning. A formal plan appears to shift a larger share home over time, with audits and reporting. The market reads this as a slow global drift toward direct control. Scenario 3. Accelerated repositioning. This is rare, but it exists as a concept. If global stress rises, institutions may compress timelines. In that world, gold doesn't just rise in price, it rises in strategic value. Notice something. In all 3 scenarios, gold is treated as a strategic object, not a speculative object. That is why this story matters. The personal translation. Now, what does this mean for you personally, without telling you what to do? It means you should start asking better questions about any asset you hold through an intermediary. Not just gold, everything. Questions like, if I needed settlement, what does settlement actually mean? If my asset is backed, what does backed mean in legal terms? If my asset is stored, do I have allocation, documentation, and an audit trail? If my asset is digital exposure, what happens in a stress event? You don't need to become paranoid. You need to become precise. Because precision is what replaces trust when trust gets expensive. Think of this story as a lighthouse. When institutions begin to prioritize custody and control, it's a signal the world is moving from confidence-based finance toward collateral-based finance. Confidence-based finance is fast and cheap. Collateral-based finance is slower and more expensive. But when the world gets uncertain, expensive becomes acceptable. So watch the custody conversation. Not because it is entertaining, because it tells you what phase we are entering. Now tell me where you're watching from, and what you think the ultimate insurance policy should optimize for. Access or control. Germany's gold reserve is large, documented, and globally distributed for historical reasons. A substantial share sits abroad because, for decades, proximity to the main pipes of settlement offered speed and flexibility. What is changing is not a single vault door. What is changing is the price of trust. When gold moves to record highs, it magnifies every custody question. When the world gets more fragmented, it magnifies every jurisdiction question. And when institutions begin to demand more verification, it tells you something important. The era of effortless confidence is fading, and the era of deliberate collateral is rising. So don't get hypnotized by the headline, watch the process. If you see clearer protocols, published standards, and routine verification, that's stabilization. If you see timetables, targets, and logistics language, that's motion. If you see sudden compression of timelines, that's stress. And if you want a simple takeaway you can carry into every part of your financial life, it is this. In calm times, I own it is enough. In stress times, I can prove it and mobilize it is everything. Final question for you. If you were responsible for a nation's ultimate insurance policy, would you optimize for maximum market access or maximum physical control? Drop your answer and your location in the comments. This is educational content, not financial advice. I'm not your advisor, and I can't see your full situation. Do your own research, verify primary sources, and consult qualified professionals before making decisions.